Welcome back to our series on etiquette. And today we are going to be discussing what to do in situations where you may just feel a little bit awkward or uncomfortable. You don't know how to respond to things, either because they're awkward or because they're just very serious situations and you don't know the best way to offer help. Now, the first is in case of a death. Oftentimes when somebody dies, we feel really bad and want to do something or want to say something to make the other person feel better within their time of grief. But it can be really difficult to try to figure out what to do. So because of that, sometimes we have this very awkward situation where somebody has a loved one pass away and then a friend who really wants to comfort them, out of awkwardness and fear of not saying the right thing or not knowing what to say, doesn't say anything at all. And that is more offensive than anything because, of course, it gives the impression that you don't care at all, even if that's the opposite of why you didn't say anything. So here are some general things that are good to do when somebody is in a time of loss and sorrow and grief. Well, the first is pretty simple, and that is just offer your condolences. Just say, "My condolences, I am so sorry." General offering of, "I know that this bad thing happened to you, and just so you know, I do care." Now, you can do that in speech, but it's also very beneficial to write out a card or a note, send flowers with a card, show up to the funeral if you can. Even if this is somebody that you didn't know and there is a funeral that is opened, obviously not something that is just limited to close family. Even if you didn't know that person, you can still be there to comfort the mourners as they are suffering and they are in a time of mourning themselves. The second thing that I want to say about this is do not pry. So this is another way of responding that can really overwhelm the person at the time of mourning. So you don't need to ask all sorts of questions about how that individual died, how the person is feeling. What you should do in this kind of situation is let that person know that you are willing to listen if they do want to share. So what you want to do is open up yourself to the other person so that they know that if they do want to share things with you, they can do that, but don't put them in a position where they feel like they have to share things that they don't want to, or that they're just not ready to really talk about. And people process death in very, very different ways. So just because you have processed grief in one way, or you have just dealt with somebody else who has processed grief, that doesn't mean someone else is going to do the same. So don't make any assumptions. Simply put yourself out there and say, "I am happy to listen. If there's anything you want to share, please let me know. And if you don't want to talk about it, that is also okay. I don't want to push." Just be straightforward and let them know, I am here to help with whatever it is that you need. And speaking of helping, it is good to be more than just general in the ways that you offer to help somebody. So this is something that people tend to do is we say, "Let me know if you need anything at this time." And it's not a bad thing to say. It's nice to say that you'll be there and maybe you mean it sincerely and that really if that person needs anything at all and they call you in the middle of the night that you'll get them whatever they need. Or sometimes people do just say that as a kind of general, yes, I care, but probably don't actually mean it in the fullest sense. So much better than saying, "Let me know if you need anything," is to offer something specific. Because most of the time, if you say, "Let me know if you need anything," the other person is simply never going to let you know, even if they do need something. Unless you are a very close friend and you have a very clearly established relationship where you do go out of your way to do these kinds of things with one another. The majority of people, the majority of the time, are never going to take you up on that. So instead of saying something really general, do something like this. Say, "What is a good day for me to drop off a meal for you and your family?" And that way, you are not saying, "Do you need me to drop off a meal?" Which they'll feel, "Oh no, I'm putting a burden on you if I ask you to do that, even if I really need it." You're offering and saying, "I am going to do this," but you are asking so that you are opening them up to say, when is it that you need a meal? So instead of just asking generally, you're asking specifically. And so you're letting them know, I am doing this thing for you. Just tell me how to do it that will serve you in a way that is best. And then the final thing with times of grief is when people are in a time of mourning, when they lose a loved one, they are usually surrounded by others who are comforting them in the immediate aftermath of loss. But a lot of times, the worst grief comes much later. And so make sure that if someone lost a loved one, you're thinking not just of the time where that loved one passes on, but you're asking months ahead. Wait, after 3 months and somebody passed away, go back and say, how have you been doing? When it is an anniversary of a death, or an anniversary of a birth of the one who passed on, or a marriage of the one who passed on, or something like that, know what those dates are. You can stick it in your phone calendar so you can check up on the person. Again, don't be pushy about it and get to a point where you are trying to force them to relive or rethink those things. But just a quick, how are you doing, really does help to show that you are thinking about them and you care, so that when they don't have people surrounding them any longer that are comforting them in their time of grief, because it's just kind of assumed you move on with your life, you can be the one who steps in to say, it's also okay to still be grieving. And people often don't feel that way. If you encounter somebody that you know, and you know that person has lost a job, say you're at some kind of gathering and you see somebody, you know that they lost their job, don't pry. Do not just try to get the details of the circumstances. You don't say, what happened? Did you get fired? What did you do? Don't do any of those things. You want to do the same thing here that you would do in many other circumstances, and that is make them aware that you kind of know something is going on, not in a judgmental way, but in a way that says, I will talk to you about this if you want to share any details with me. So you could say something like, oh, I heard that you are no longer at that job. How are things going? Very general, right? You're not saying, have you found another job yet? Are you without a job? You're not critiquing them. You are just saying, how are you doing, with the acknowledgement that they're no longer there, right? You're not saying you got fired, you got laid off. And that way, if that person wants to talk to you about it, they can. And if they answer the how are you question with something completely unrelated, then you know this is a topic that they don't want to talk about. And then you just move on and talk about something else. If somebody has an injury, like a really obvious injury, you see somebody and they've got a giant black eye and it's at a public event, it's really obvious and everybody knows that it's obvious. You don't want to be the one to point it out. You don't want to go up to somebody with an injury and say, hey, what the heck happened to you? Or make some kind of awkward joke about it. Did you get in a fight? Did you get in a bar fight or something like that? I think that's where people tend to go, because when we feel awkward about a situation, and we do feel awkward when somebody has an injury, we don't know what it is, it's not something we're expecting, what we tend to do is joke to hide the awkwardness. And it's really better not to joke about that. Now, some of this also depends on the closeness of your relationship, of course, and you kind of know what kind of things you can say to what people. But even in a public setting, regardless of how close you are and how much you kind of rib on the other person, it's really not an appropriate thing to do. And even if you think you can joke with somebody about those things, even if you are close with that person and you joke with each other, you don't know how self-conscious they actually are about that thing. Sometimes people still can kind of joke, but they really actually feel really bad about it and feel like they have to joke and play along. So just to avoid that, the entire dynamics, just don't ask about it at all. Now, if you are really concerned about the person, you can ask about it privately, especially if you know the person well, respectfully, and just wanted to make sure you're okay. Do it in a way that shows that you are asking out of concern for the person, to make sure you just want to know that they're okay, rather than poking fun at them or pointing it out in front of a bunch of people in order to embarrass them. And if they are at a public event, they may have just shared the story 100 times of something that happened to them. And it may be something very embarrassing. Maybe they were carrying groceries and tripped and fell on their face. And this is a guy who generally sees himself as very tough, and he's kind of embarrassed that it wasn't a grand story, And then people want to exaggerate some grand story because it makes them feel a little less silly for hurting themselves. So just avoid that altogether. And just in general, if somebody goes through something very difficult and you know about it, just don't make comments about that in public, even if you are doing it out of concern because you want to make sure the other person is okay. Those things should always be addressed in private, and they should be addressed with care. Because even if everyone knows something difficult happened and they're at a public gathering, they may be at the public gathering because they want to get their mind off of whatever the heck that thing is that happened, and they don't want to deal with it. So just don't bring it up. There's no good reason to bring that up in a public setting. Again, if there's somebody that you're close with and you feel like you have a kind of relationship where you do care for one another and can express care in the midst of a difficult situation, do it another time, not at a public place. If you see an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend at a party, and they are with someone else, say you had an ex-girlfriend in college and now you run into her and she's married to somebody else. That can be really awkward. It's always awkward seeing exes, unless you've stayed in contact with them, which is often a bad idea. But most of the time, it's an awkward experience, and you both know it's awkward. And because of that, you can make it more awkward by doing one of two things. One is you both just know you're awkward, you kind of avoid each other, and it's just this weird, kind of elephant in the room, right? That makes everybody else feel awkward because there's this weird tension because you haven't said anything to the other person. You both know the other person's there, but you're actively avoiding each other. And then it makes it awkward for you and your dates and everybody else. Or you can feel like, I have to seem normal, so in order to seem normal, I am going to go up to that person and talk to them way too much. And that is also awkward because most likely, her new husband does not really want to talk to her ex-boyfriend. So the best thing to do is get over the awkwardness. If you see an ex with a spouse, like in this example that I'm giving here, say to the one, "Oh, hi, whatever your name is. It's good to see you again. Oh, is this your new husband? It's really great to meet you. I'm whatever your name is. And then I hope you have a great night," and walk away. You don't need to make a prolonged conversation, but it's going to be way more awkward if you don't just do the normal greeting, act like a normal human being. And once you do, the tension's kind of gone, everybody feels less awkward, and then you can just kind of move on with the night. If someone has a very thick accent, this can be really difficult because there are dynamics where you may feel like you're being really offensive if you don't know what they're saying, or you may feel like you're insulting them or insulting their country of origin because they have a thick accent that you don't understand. And you want to be able to respond to them just like you would respond to anybody else. So the best way to deal with this is, first of all, not to just pretend you know what they're saying, which people do this all the time. I've done this myself in certain situations. I have, but it's not good. When you pretend that you know what somebody else is saying, you may end up saying something really awkward or agreeing with something really weird because you don't really know what they're saying. And they probably are going to pick up on the fact that you're not understanding what they're saying. So if somebody has a thick accent, they probably know that they have an accent. Right? They probably know that they are not a fluent English speaker, they're a newer English speaker, and that some people can't understand them. So that's not going to fool them. It's just going to really make them feel a lot worse because you're not even being straightforward or honest with them to have a real conversation with them. Or the other thing that you might do in response is to say, "I have no idea what you're saying," in a kind of offensive way. To say "Come on, what's wrong with you? I can't understand you," which also makes them feel bad as well. So there are ways to address it honestly without doing it in a way that makes them feel like they're inadequate at communicating with you in your language. So just say something like, "I'm sorry, I'm having a very difficult time understanding you." Something that points the onus to you rather than the other person. And this is just a general rule in conversation that's always very helpful, is that if there is a problem, the other person is far more likely to listen to that problem when you put the onus on yourself first. Say, "I'm sorry, I can't understand. Could you repeat that?" Something like that. So you're saying, it's in my understanding that's the problem, not in the way that you are speaking. If you can't remember somebody's name, this one is very difficult for me. I meet a lot of people, and it is very difficult to remember so many names. I always remember people's faces. I remember things people tell me. I remember little details about people that I meet in different places, but I very often forget names. And if you can't remember somebody's name, just admit that you don't remember and ask, say, "Oh, I can't recall your name." Or even if it'll feel better for you to make you sound as if you haven't just totally forgotten them. You may say something like, "Oh, I remember that we had that great conversation about Johann Sebastian Bach, but I can't recall what your name was." Again, you're putting the onus on yourself, not the other person. And that way, you are still showing it's not that I think you don't matter, right? Because that's why we don't want to ask people's names, because we don't want to feel like I just forgot you because who are you? So you may want to do something like that to give an idea to them that you do remember them and you remember a conversation you had or you remember something about them. But it's much better to do the awkward thing and be uncomfortable and ask the name early on. It's far weirder if it has been years. This has happened. I've seen this happen to people. I've seen where somebody pronounces a name wrong and the other person never says anything about how their name is being pronounced wrong. And it's been years that they've run into this person occasionally and they just don't have the heart to say anything. And it's going to be really embarrassing when they do realize that they've never been corrected. So it's much better to do these things early than just wait and have it as this ongoing problem. And then you're going to be thinking about it for a significant amount of time every time you see that person of, I hope I don't have to say their name. Or you're going to do that thing where you just try to listen really hard to what everybody else is saying to hear if someone else says their name. I do this a lot. It actually kind of works okay, but not if it's distracting you from the whole conversation. If you run into a man at a party, say, and he has his fly open or he's got something stuck in his teeth, it is much better to say something than not to say anything. Now, if a man sees say a woman with her, zipper unzipped, it's probably not a good idea for him to say anything at that point. But if a man sees another guy like that, don't point it out publicly. Don't make a joke about it. Say something as discreetly as possible, but it is much better for him to know that than not. And if that happens to you, try not to be really obvious and zipping up your pants, Try to, if you can, kind of walk away, walk to the bathroom, find a way to get to the bathroom without everybody seeing that, and then fix the issue and come back. Being discreet is important in general. If someone offers you alcohol and you do not drink alcohol, this can very frustratingly be an awkward situation. I get this all the time. I do not drink alcohol of any kind. And it is sometimes very annoying in social situations where you don't drink alcohol and somebody asks and you say, no, thank you, I don't drink. People will sometimes look at you like you're insane. People will start to question you and say, well, why? What's wrong with you? Why don't you drink? That's like, are you from another planet? Why in the world would you not drink? If you don't drink, you do not owe an explanation of that to anyone. So you do not feel the pressure to answer that question. Don't feel the pressure that you have to justify your decisions. You never have to justify a decision of why you don't eat or drink something that you don't eat or drink. Just say, I just don't drink alcohol. That's all, and just, that's it. No need to justify yourself. Don't feel like you have to. And so if you are offering somebody alcohol and they say no thank you, that they don't drink, do not pressure them. Do not push them. Don't try to get them to give an answer. They do not need to do that to you. And all you're going to do is put them in a really awkward position. And maybe they're going to feel like they have to all of a sudden share a bunch of intimate details about their life, about how one of their parents was an alcoholic and this emotionally damaged them in childhood. And so they made a decision not to drink. You don't need to talk about that. And so don't put that pressure on somebody that they have to do something like that. And the final awkward situation, and this is really more for kids, it's like to teach your kids, that is that if you receive a gift that you already have. If someone gives you a gift, you already have it, you open it, there is no need to tell them that you already have the gift. You just be thankful that they purchased something that they thought that you would like, that they went out of their way to do something kind for you, to show care for you. And so you say thank you, and that's it. No need to bring anything else up in the conversation. And that's a good thing to tell your kids as they are opening presents. Just let them know prior to birthdays. If someone gives you something you already have, that's okay. Just say thank you, and then we move on. Well, that's the end of this part of this series, so I hope you learned something useful in these kinds of situations, helping you to navigate some of these difficult social situations you may encounter. Make sure you subscribe to the Justin Center podcast on your podcast app, and we'll see you in the next one. God bless.